Welcome to the Opinionated Benchwarmers Podcast, episode 172. Your opinionated benchwarmers are back to do what we do best. And woo! It's fantasy football time. I thought I'd switch up the intro, man. How y'all feeling, bro?
Hey, I respect the Ric Flair, brother. Ric Flair in there. No, this is an exciting time, bro. So I'm gonna match it. I gotta match the energy with that. Like, bro, it is fantasy football. Literally in 2 days, we about to watch our first football game. So I'm
That's
excited,
crazy,
big
ain't
bro.
it? Yeah.
Yeah, no, like y'all said, man, it's an exciting time. Always one of the most fun times for us because obviously we're ones that play in multiple leagues. So we always have an opportunity to compete with each other in at least two leagues, but we all have separate leagues and things of that sort. So we get really excited during that time. I'm gonna just throw a disclaimer out there to the listeners. Been a little bit under the weather, so if I start coughing at any point, my brothers, I'm gonna expect y'all to just pick up where I am, but just for the listeners out there, if I kind of immediately cut out, I just giving y'all the heads up that I just been a little bit under the weather.
Hey, it's all good, man. It's all good. You had a big couple weeks this past week, man. You know what I'm saying? So but yeah, man, it's exciting to be back. You see, I'm ready. I got the Saints in the background. You know what I'm saying? You know how it go. So we all, got the terrible tile, our version of the terrible tile in the background. So been hearing good news out of camp. So I'm excited to get going, with fantasy football. As promised, we'll begin our coverage of fantasy football from this point going forward until we feel like we've given you all the information that you need to conquer your leagues. So in order to do that and to keep up with that, obviously subscribe to our YouTube channel, which you can hit the subscribe button, like this video as well. And then if you're an audio person, listen to it on your way to work. Obviously, subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. That's how you can get notified when we drop. If you're trying to win your leagues, I'm telling you, we got some collectively, we're a monster. We compete against each other all the time, but we got some really sharp minds here. We put our all into it and our research into it. So if you're trying to win your league, lock in with us. And as always, shout out to the listeners, shout out to the day one listeners, shout out to the new listeners. If you're just being introduced to us, this is what we do. We talk sports. So welcome aboard, welcome to the channel. What now? We're gonna jump into it. Obviously, starting from a new season, obviously with free agency and everything. We know collectively, we thought it would be a good idea to kind of update you on the new faces and old faces in new places, if you will, and just trying to keep track of it. Obviously, a big part of the strategy with fantasy is just knowing what the heck these players are. And just because they were somewhere last year, don't mean they will be as effective this year. And then obviously the opposite. You might have a player that may be more effective in their new home. So guys, we just gonna talk through it, kind of roundtable panel discussion. But the first one I thought was the biggest one, or the most interesting one, if you will, is Calvin Ridley left the Jacksonville Jaguars and has found a new home with the Titans. Implications there of him. I thought that was a big thing because I felt like him and Trevor Lawrence were trying to build a rapport. I know the first half of that season, it seemed like they were on the same page, but it kind of like Calvin just kind of tinkered off a little bit. And maybe that's due to the fact of Trevor Lawrence being injured last season. Yet alone, that's a talent. Calvin really proved after being suspended off of a season for the gambling incident that he's still effective and he's still a good receiver in this NFL league. So, guys, break it down. What do you think that means for his career? Or what are your thoughts on it? And what would you draft him at in your fantasy draft coming up in a redraft? Obviously, uh, I don't need to say this, do I? But we only discussing PPR full point. So
Yeah, in that format, when you think about that, right now his ADP is around the sixth round, which I think is good, solid spot for him. You get him as your wide receiver two, maybe wide receiver three. I'm definitely taking a chance on him right now, and he's a guy that I'm high on. He's a guy that I actually traded for this offseason in my dynasty league. So when I think about Calvin Ridley, I think about when his 1 year with the Jaguars, he was very productive. And then his new coach, Brian Callahan, coming over from the Bengals, a guy that has obviously, thrown in a lot with the Bengals. I think if you read the tea leaves, looking over at the Tennessee Titans, they're going to be a team that's throwing a lot, and that's a whole, obviously, 180 change of what they've done before when they were a run first team with a Derrick Henry led team. So you look at the tea leaves, bringing in Tony Pollard. Obviously, I know we're going to touch on that later. Tajay Spears, right? And then you look at them giving Calvin Ridley, 4-year, $92 million deal, $50 million guaranteed. You guys, as you know before, you follow the money with these guys, you know that they're going to use them. And their Brian Callahan has came out and said that they want to use them like Jamar Chase. I don't know about y'all, but when I hear a coach come out and say they want to use him like Jamar Chase, and when I think about Jamar Chase, I think about screen games, I think about manufactured touches, right? And when you think in PPR league, right, and you got manufactured touches, a guy that's already great at route running, we already know he can run routes really well. But you're telling me that you're going to manufacture 5+ touches a game for him already? That's something that I want to invest in the 6th round. To me, honestly, is probably too low. So I'm probably grabbing him higher than the 6th round. What he's projected to go right now.
Yeah, I think that, honestly, I think that he landed in a good spot, as you already mentioned. I know that, of course, you have D-Hop that's over there. They brought in Tyler Boyd. So, of course, there will be some target share that will be there by having those 2 additional pieces. But I think that still among those 3, I think that at the stages of their career that they're at now, I think that he will be the wide receiver 1 over there. I would probably have him. I think the 6th round is a solid spot to really grab him. I think that when you're looking at Calvin Ridley, you're expecting him to be your wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 on your team. If you can slot him in as your wide receiver 3, you're cooking with something on your team. And so I think that it's going to be, as Los already mentioned and really alluded to, I don't have to rehash a bunch of it. I really think that there's potential that even when I look at these and you talk about landing spots, I think interesting twist, kind of as you were mentioning, is it stock up or stock down? And so when I look at Calvin Ridley, I look at it and I think that this move for him could be stock up. I think that also, too, you look at the fact that not that, of course, he missed time based on an injury. We know the reason why he was out. But, it's typically a lot of times that second year where you really see somebody gets back to fully being themselves. And so they talk about that definitely off of injury. But, of course, him missing a full year, him kind of having his year in Jacksonville to kind of regain his form and things of that sort. Now I think that you'll maybe see the consistency play out a little bit more. That was my only fear and concern of Calvin really in the past. Even this past year, he was pretty inconsistent. There was a lot of boom and bust there for him. And so that's why you want to make sure that he's more of a wide receiver 2. And if you can get him at wide receiver 3, it would be great just because of the boom and bust there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, when you look at Tennessee's situation and where he landed at, I think that you look at Calvin Ridley, I mean, he is what he is. He's a talent. He's explosive, great route runner, even dating back to his days in Bama and some of the good years that he had in Atlanta. One thing I will comment on that wasn't said is that his he degraded at quarterback a little bit on top of having those new weapons there. And when I look at Will Levis, who's projected going into camp as a starter for the Titans this year, of course, they got Malik Willis over there too that's backing him up, but he hasn't shown any signs that he'll overcome Will. I don't like the quarterback situation there. I never was high on Will coming out of Kentucky, University of Kentucky, but yet, just like Ramon mentioned, I mean, if you was able to get him as your wide receiver 3, I mean, I'll take him there. I'll be comfortable there because at that point you've already stacked your roster and you have your wide receiver 1 and 2 locked in. So if you have the opportunity to add a wide receiver 3 as Calvin, why not take a shot on him? I think that it could probably be a boom or bust pick for you. But it's a lot of unknowns there. My advice to anybody that is kind of prospecting him before your draft, I just keep an eye out on training camp. That might be a good tell into how they plan to use him. And you can actually get some reports on how he is actually doing in camp and how Will Levis is looking. And I think his success, a lot of his success and what we want him to be or what we're used to seeing will lean heavily on what his quarterback play will be. I look at even DeAndre Hopkins coming over in free agency over to the Titans and how inconsistent he was. And I think a lot of it was due to inconsistent quarterback play. So that's my only concern. But like I agree with you guys for the most part, if I'm able to get him as a flex play, I'm comfortable with it. But another new face, Los talked about Tony Pollard. We saw what he did in Dallas. He wasn't quite as effective in his first year in Tennessee. And, it's a plethora of reasons: inconsistent quarterback play, a shaky line. All those things play a factor into it. But needless to say, he wasn't as effective as he came in Dallas. It was almost like fool's gold. He left at the right time. Dallas didn't want to pay him. The Titans took a chance on him, and they failed. Are we looking at a bounce back year here for Tony Pollard? Like Los mentioned, they added another weapon. Do you feel as though Tony Pollard will be take another step forward this year, or do you think that what we saw last year is what he is?
No, I think Tony Pollard showed us that he's not a number one guy, which is fine, right? Some guys just not built to be the guy to take the load. Zeke left that position, and then sometimes as fantasy owners and sometimes as fantasy fans, right? We look at it like, man, all the touches is his now. Sometimes guys are more productive with just the right amount of touches. I think last year he showed that he just can't be that guy that carries the load. But when he is in a backfield, when he's splitting it, I think he can be very productive. So I think he has, I think it's only up from here because last year was not that great of a year for him. He was not very lacking in the touchdown department. But I think, in this offense and Bill Callahan's offense, I think he's going to have a chance to do well because he is not looked at as just the only guy. I think Chadjay Spears is a guy I know we're going to talk about later. Is a guy that's sharing the backfield with him that's going to take some of that workload off. Last year in Dallas, he was looked at as the guy, and he just wasn't well. Right now, he's projected seventh round. So I think that's a good place for him to throw that dart, just to see where he lands. By that time, who
Absolutely.
knows? You have maybe you have your running back one. So maybe you're taking a chance on him as your running back 2/running back 3.
Yeah, and I think that when you look at it, as you already alluded to it, y'all mentioned, it was just the expectations that were set for him. It was, hey, like you said, Zeke is vacating it. This is going to be the Tony Pollard show in Dallas. And obviously he didn't live up to that. You were looking at Tony Pollard. People were saying he was going to be a top 5 running back, within the league. And so what we do have to still assess is that he finished as RB 14 last year. That means he was slightly, just as you were talking about him being potentially a RB2 for you, he was slightly below that RB1 level. And so it's just really that, honestly, our expectations ended up being too high for him, but he still delivered a relatively respectable season when we think about, guys that finish within that range. And so I think that it's going to be definitely a good spot for him where he doesn't feel that that all the, the workload is on his shoulders. And I think that you can see him finish, probably within that RB 16 to 20 range or so. I think that maybe he'll take a little bit of a dip still from what he had last year in Dallas, just because, he will have to share that backfield. But I think that he's going to be uber productive, kind of more so of what we're a little bit, probably a little bit more productive yards per carry and things of that sort. So I think it'll be a good spot for him, honestly.
We'll say we'll see. From my perspective, I look at a collective, and my concern also carries over with their quarterback play and how effective they will be as a unit, as an offense. Clearly, we just haven't seen it yet. So I'm not as high on Tony Pollard. But again, like you guys said, if I'm taking him for depth and you're able to snag him in the 7th round and he's there, obviously I'm gonna take him as my RB3 on my team. Again, my roster and my core is solidified. As taking a shot on him as my RB3, are definitely doing that. But
so
if you're
question.
looking
So
at
if he's sitting there and you kind of stack the deck, let's just say you've gone with a roster construction that's, heavy on wide receivers. So you landed really your top, 3, potentially even to 4 guys if it just lines up perfectly. Would you not consider Tony Pollard at all as an RB2? Like, would RB3 be the earliest that you would be taking him on your roster?
Yeah, for me, yeah. If I'm going, I'm not particularly a huge fan of zero running
Zero.
back
Yeah.
strategy. But if I did, I wouldn't feel comfortable with him being my RB2. I just don't. I mean, we haven't. What I saw last year is not. But you are banking on the fact that this offense is going to look different. They're going to be different. They're going to look different, different coaching, different schemes, and they did add another weapon. So you would be taking a chance on that. But me, for my blood and my strategy and how I am, I need something solid right there. And I think inconsistent play. If I feel like you're inconsistent, belongs in that flex spot for me. If they're in my starting lineup.
I
Okay.
respect it.
If we're looking at Derrick Henry here, found a new home in Baltimore. Lamar Jackson has a new running mate. I think that is a huge addition. If Derrick Henry can stay healthy, we know what Lamar can do coming off an NFL MVP season. We know how explosive this offense was last year. Zay Flowers, the whole 9 yards. They lost Odell, but we're hearing that Rashad Bateman is going to take another step forward this year. I mean, they're getting that tight end back, Mr. O Reliable for him, but they still got Likely, who's still a solid offensive player as well. But when you look at Derrick Henry and what it means for this backfield, we've covered it on previous podcasts. I mean, that's huge. I want to know what you guys, what's your strategy with Derrick Henry? Obviously, that is somebody you're gonna pull the trigger on late in drafts. He's gonna be there. He still has the net, but interesting enough, he still has that name value. So you don't want to overvalue him in the draft. But where are y'all comfortable taking him, and where would you want him on your roster?
Yeah, when I look at Derrick Henry, man, I look at the situation that you mentioned, right? You got the read option with Derrick Henry coming downhill, right? What are you going to take away? You going to take away Lamar's legs, or are you going to take away this bus that's coming towards you? So I look at Derrick Henry, and I can say he can easily. I don't think by the end of the year, if he said he led the league in touchdowns, any of us would be surprised, right? And so right now he's going running back 9, and that's somewhere in the range between second round, mid-second to the beginning of the third round, right? I think everybody kind of excited about the pairing with Lamar Jackson. So I look at that, and if he's there in the right spot, I'm taking him as a borderline. If depending on if let's say if I'm at the beginning of the draft, right? Let's say I take, Jamar Chase, right? First round, right? Then I come around and I get a Marvin Harrison, right? Second round. I'm sitting there and I'm gonna take if again beginning around that beginning, swinging around third round, I'm looking at Derrick Henry as that RB1 and being comfortable with that because I knew I took 2 high-end wide receivers. Right, it's all how you build your roster. But I'm for sure taking him as a running back 2, and I'm okay with taking him as a running back 1. Assuming again that read option and he scores many touchdowns this year.
Yeah, I'm definitely actually fully on board with taking him as an RB1. When I look at it, Derrick Henry still finishes the RB8 last year. In the conditions there as Tennessee in the conditions that you don't like as much, Rob. And so obviously you take him and you bring him to Baltimore for everything that y'all have already talked about. And the fact too is that, I know people will say, oh, Lamar has the rushing yards and these touchdowns and things of that sort. Lamar Jackson really doesn't accumulate a lot of rushing touchdowns year on year out. Like I think he only had 5 last year compared to, a guy that we look at, Jalen Hurts, that typically takes a lot, and had like 15 last year. So in saying that, for comparatively speaking, the opportunity is still going to be there for Derrick Henry. We know that Russian offense is going to always excel. And so I'm actually comfortable with Derrick Henry in a redraft, format being my RB1 for my team. Would I want to take him in the first round? Maybe not so. I would hope to pair him with a high end, wide receiver one. But if I'm sitting there, even for me, I wouldn't even necessarily be looking top of the third necessarily to take him. If I'm sitting there and I'm drafting kind of back end, like mid of that first round or so like that, or high to mid first round, and he's coming around in that second round, I take Derrick Henry in that second round as my, as my RB1. It just depends on what is sitting there around him.
So I feel like you took it a step further from Los, and I'm going to take it a whole nother level here. I am definitely taking him as my confident running back run. I think that the year that he had last year was kind of over. I think people overthought it. I mean, he was in a bad situation. Ryan Tannehill was injured for the most of the season, who's an average quarterback at best. And then you get Will Levis, who's a rookie trying to figure it out on the fly. We already know that the defenses always loaded the box up against this guy, even when he did have some sort of a functional quarterback. But now he has Lamar Jackson, a former NFL MVP. They can't focus on him. So I think that, the fact that he's falling around that running back 9 range here, and even lower, I think that, 19th overall, I think that that's just a little bit too low for him. And I think that that's a result of, like you said, just overreacting to what happened last year. Go ahead and get your steal. You get your RB1 in the first round, swing. I'm swinging back around. If Derrick Henry there, I'm taking him. That's just how I feel.
Yeah, I'll add to that. And, I think we all on board with Derrick Henry. You guys are obviously a little bit more excited about him than I am. But I think for every reason, because now you look at this, right? Gus Edwards scored 13 touchdowns last year in that offense. Gus Edwards, right? A guy that he was a great pickup, great waiver wire
Dude, he
pickup,
got
but
me
not
through
the
the
guy,
season, man. He got me
right?
through the season.
Exactly. Not a guy that you necessarily talk about as a top 5 running back, but you switch that out now. Gus Edwards is now with the Chargers, and you bring in a Derrick Henry, man. I think you can expect at least 12 touchdowns from him, right?
Oh
That'll
yeah,
be at least
easy.
matching what
Yeah.
Gus Edwards did last year.
Floor.
So
And that's just from
I'm
Gus
excited
just
about it.
falling in the end zone too.
Yep.
I mean, he wasn't really even breaking
Yep.
huge runs.
And Derrick Henry, with a chip on his shoulder as well too. All
Yeah,
right.
and then when I hear reports that you're spending $1 million on your body, boom, LeBron flashbacks. I'm Derrick Henry, King Henry will be just fine. But I think as we wrap up this segment, I think there's a plethora of running backs, and we plan on doing another segment that is relevant to running backs. But I did want to touch on this one because it's an interesting conversation, and that's Stefon Diggs, who landed down south in Houston with a signing over the summer. A lot of people forgot about that, and recency bias. He hadn't had the best years. I think he's been up and down. I thought he started off last season really hot, and then for some reason him and Josh Allen weren't on the same page toward the end of the season. But nonetheless, we know what he has. We know what he has. We know the weapons over there. We know the year that Nico had. We know the year that Tank Dell had before he was injured, who probably would have been offensive player of the year maybe if he didn't get hurt at the end of that season. And then, man,
Well,
again, I don't
offensive
want
rookie of the year, right?
offensive rookie of the year, my bad. But I don't want to even talk about the running back that they added because we're gonna get to that in a moment. But this team is stacked offensively and talent wise. And I hear a lot of rumbling so far that people are scared to take Stefon Diggs, obviously because of a crowded receiving core. And I just wanted to kind of clear the air. I know we all on the same page, so just one of y'all just explain why you shouldn't let that run you away from Stefon Diggs.
No, man. I mean, sometimes we do. I think as fantasy owners, I would like to change the narrative where because a receiver goes to another, receiving core that has a lot of good guys, they're like, oh no, the targets are going away. But you got to think about it this way: if they're a productive offense, their touchdown opportunities also go up, right? It's not going to be every game that they're exploding. They may not be the guy that with most of the targets anymore, but sometimes 2 more targets is not as good as an actual touchdown, right? That's 2 points, right? Plus the yardage, plus the touchdown. I'd rather the touchdown, right? So I think their touchdowns are going to go up because they're going to be a more productive offense this year. Now, there may be times where you're frustrated and see, you wish that it was Stefon Diggs and it's Nico Collins actually scoring a touchdown. Like there's going to be those times, but again, you want a successful offense. You want pieces from successful offenses.
And the thing about it, ultimately, you're dealing with a quarterback that will be able to get it around to the various targets that are there. When I look at it, and it's not comparatively speaking of saying that these 3 guys are just like these 3 that I'm about to mention, but I think that when we talked about the Bengals in times past, it was like, how are they going to feed those weapons over there? You have Jamar Chase, you have T. Higgins, you have Tyler Boyd, you have also too Joe Mixon in the backfield. And so it's like, how are you going to feed them all? But when you have that guy in Joe Burrow that's back there, he was able to make sure that you were looking at 2 of those guys being looked at as wide receiver ones from a fantasy production standpoint. And so when I look at now with Houston and what they have in CJ Stroud, I think that we're all confident on this podcast that CJ Stroud can make it happen with those guys that are there. And ultimately, the early reports are saying that, Stefon Diggs has been the wide receiver 1 in camp thus far. And so you look at it, I think that he will still have that opportunity to finish as a wide receiver 1. He finished at wide receiver 9 last year, which once again, it's this kind of Derrick Henry effect that we had on Stefon Diggs, that we have such high expectations of him being, finishing at wide receiver 3 or finishing at wide receiver 4. That wide receiver 9 looked like a really bad year, but that still ultimately, from a drafting strategy standpoint, that still is a wide receiver 1 for you, because if he finishes in that top 12, he's a wide receiver 1 for you. And so I still think that Stefon Diggs has that opportunity to finish as a wide receiver 1. And I think that you could be confident taking him. Now, for me, I used to be definitively like, okay, I'm in the first round Diggs camp. I'm not as strongly planting that first round flag. I could take him, in the first round, but it would be back into the first round. But I would love him more so in the second round for me this year, especially if I get him in that kind of high second round range. But if you still take him in the first, I won't have too big of qualms on it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm looking at him more so as a wide receiver too. For me, I think that I would even say a mid to low end wide receiver too. I do think that he is relevant. I do think that he will demand a lot of targets. But it is a reality that Tank Dell is there, and Tank Dell will demand a lot of targets as well, especially with him taking the top off defenses on the back end. And we all know, and we all agree, touchdown wins fantasy championships. And I think that Tank Dell could go for have a 7 or 8 touchdown season. And I think that he will get a bunch of yards because of
Tank is the clear 3 there.
Yeah, I'm not saying he's not, but I still think even him being the 3, I still think he's going to demand a lot. Because how are you going to cover all of that? You can't double Stefon. You can't double Nico. You can't double 3. You got to choose one. And I think the one that's going to be left out and forgot about a lot is Tank Dell, who has the speed to take the top off the defense.
I feel like there's slightly bias there because you're a Tank guy.
That's not guy.
I think you're trying to manifest some stuff there.
Tank Dell.
I think Tank Dell's a good player. I'm not saying he's not a good player, but
So I'm not saying that's relevant enough to. I'm not saying like me saying Stefon is not. I would like him in a wide receiver 2 doesn't mean that he's not. I mean, that's still great, a solid wide receiver 2.
Yeah.
But like Tank, like how can you strategize against all 3 of those guys? Somebody gonna be open.
That's fair.
And then you got Joe Mixon that you got too much. Then you got Stroud to worry about who can spread it around. I just feel like it's gonna be more of, I think, a more of an even balance of it. Because I would even go to say you may be able to get low end wide receiver 2, top wide receiver 3 production out of Tank Dell.
Yeah, and you got to think about Dalton Schultz over there too.
Yeah,
I like Tank Dell. I'm not as high on him as you are. To be able to get wide receiver, low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3 value from. I don't know.
Basically a flex play. Basically, if you can look at him as a flex play, would you be comfortable starting him in your flex position week in and week out? Being that he does have that touchdown ceiling.
It's one to think about, because I don't get me wrong. I think that he possesses greater talent than Tyler Boyd when I say this, but I think that he's going to have to fit that kind of bill right now within that team. I think that he is the Tyler Boyd among that wide receiver trio. That's my honest opinion. And I think that when you look at that, okay, Stefon, if you're saying Stefon is your wide receiver 2, where now are we putting Nico Collins? And so are we saying that they got 3 wide receivers that can be in that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 range? That's what you're predicting?
No, I'm not saying. I don't think that. I think that Nico could be a wide receiver.
You think Nico is the number 1 over there?
Yeah, I think Nico is the number 1 over there. Yeah. To me. To me, just talent wise, I don't know. Yeah. Camp, we were 5 days in the training camp. I will preface that, but Nico talent wise, to me, will be that wide receiver 1. I think Stefon's wide receiver 2, and then obviously Tank. I think when it's all said and done, when camp's over, I think that's what I'm predicting.
I think we'll see. I know that Nico did have the year where he broke out last year, but I do think that we have to have the understanding too, or the outlook of what Stefon Diggs has been in this league, like proven year in and year out.
Yeah, I agree. Also, that's an interesting conversation.
Also, that's very interesting. I also want to follow the money. Nico Collins got paid this offseason as well, so that's another thing to add to it.
So you don't
Diggs is it? Huh? No. Huh?
So Low sound like he's agreeing with me that Nico.
Well, he has some Nico stock as well, which I also have Nico stock in another dynasty league as well too. So.
I just think Nico's gonna be the guy. This is how I see it.
I think he will.
I think Tank Dell's going to be the guy that's going to stretch the field, make you big plays, right?
Mm-hmm.
Diggs is going to be your chain mover, but when it comes down to the jump ball, all that stuff, your touchdown maker is going to be Nico Collins. And so, with our theory and what we say about touchdowns that win the games for you. That's why I think Nico's going to be the number 1 guy, right?
And I think Tank it will be productive. And I think that if you are to get him late in rounds in a redraft, which you will be able to, I think that I would be comfortable putting him in my starting lineup. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? So, but
yeah.
we'll see. It'll be
There's no
interesting.
Dig. When we say the money as well too, Diggs is in a contract year too, so he's gonna have that added
Yeah.
motivation to get that bag.
Yeah. Well, I did want to get into this, and I think we spent a lot of time there with new faces, new places, no, old faces, new places, and we'll get into that more as fantasy talk goes on. But I did want to jump into running back duos and just where you guys have these running backs ranked and where you plan to take them at. So let's just jump into that right quick, okay? Y'all good with that?
Yep.
All right. So as we get into these duos, we got Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algiers. Obviously, Tyler Algiers had a big impact on that offense, even though Arthur Smith ruined Bijan rookie year. Refusing to utilize him, his usage was a little lower than we expected. And like Ramon mentioned, which has been a common theme throughout all these players, is the expectation that we've set. And Bijan was going last year in fantasy drafts, in some drafts, number one. So, guys expected big things out of him, but he didn't have quite the year. But this is the year I feel like he's going to really take a step forward. I think Raheem Morris going to do right by him, and I think he's going to feed him. But you got Tyler Algier, who's relevant as well. And then you got Jameer Gibbs, and you got David Montgomery, Devon A. Chain, and then you got Raheem Mustard. Um, with those three duos, what do you guys rank them, and who do you like the most out of all of those? What tandem?
No, when I think about Bijan and Tyler Algier, right now Bijan is the second running back going off the board, only behind Christian McCaffrey, right? Which is around a top five pick, mid-round pick, which is I think he's deserving of that because of his ceiling and what he did. And we've seen what he did in the limited time he showed those flashes. So he's definitely deserving of that. But and I look at Tyler Algier, who's going around the fourth, fifth round, another good guy that's shown that he can be productive in the NFL. I'm not against anyone. If I had to pick either one of those, if I'm like, hey, who would I rather between those guys? In the right spot, I'm taking both of those guys, right? Because Tyler Algier is literally one injury away from being a running back one, right? To getting majority of the carries and to being the guy. So I'm not against either one of those guys. I know that's kind of a cop out, but when I look at that backfield, but again, right spot, I'm taking both of those guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think though, as it currently stands, I'm a guy. I'm gonna go off the basis of the talent that's there. I really believe in what Bijan Robinson brings from a talent standpoint. It's really just been having that proper opportunity, and I think with the changes that you've seen to that organization, even as things were alluded to, even from a quarterback standpoint as well, I think that Bijan is going to have that opportunity to live up to what he is from a talent standpoint, and so. I know in going, RB2 right now, I think the names that also too that hover around him are Breece Hall, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, Jameer Gibbs are some of the names that follow. And I think that all of them in their various situations, not that I have major questions, but you could have some questions here or there about any of them that follow. And so I think that that is a proper spot for him. I would have him anywhere from that RB2 to that RB5 range. I think that those names are a little bit interchangeable. So if you're talking about between him and Tyler Algier, and it's not just saying that, of course, I think he's a better talent, but where they're particularly going at this point, I'm still favored taking a guy like Bijan Robinson just because of what that ceiling that's there. Is it going to be if you do see a Tyler Algier fall, or especially if he falls to a great spot, a great spot in the draft where you can take him as a handcuff, as you were alluding to, potentially too low. So like that's a perfect situation as well too. But out of those two, give me Bijan.
Yeah, I mean, I like these duo rankings, and I'm a strong proponent. Like I said, last fantasy season, if you listen to our preview last year, I said I love handcuffs. I love handcuffs, and I think any of these duos that we are about to get into, if you get the first running back, it's almost a given that you need to kind of target when you're going to take the second one because that could be an automatic starter. But in particular, as we discussed, Bijan and his situation has changed, and I think it relies on Kirk Cousins a lot as well. And I think Kirk Cousins will unlock this offense. You got Kyle Pitts there. You got Drake London. You have just a plethora of talent there. Darryl Mooney was added over the summer. You have a lot. Y'all know how I feel about Daryl Mooney, but you just add all of this talent that has to open up things for a talent like Bijan. I'm huge on Bijan this year. I think that he will have one of those seasons that we expected him to have last year. And with Tyler Algier, like you said, this is my favorite duo off of any ones we're going to get into because he is an RB1 in his own right on another team. So I think they complement each other well. Give me Bijan. That's my guy this year that I'm riding with, and I like that duo the most. As we get into the rest of them, Jameer Gibbs, David Montgomery, Devin A. Chain, Raheem Mustard, and then you got Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. Out of those, what's the next duo you rocking with?
Yeah, I'll just look at the guys, Jamari Gibbs and David Montgomery, right? These are two guys that are relatively close right now and where they're going, right? You got Gibbs that's going towards the end of the second round and everything. And for the listeners here and for the ones that are watching, I always base this off a 12-man league. That's kind of standard of what we've been doing. So when I say end of the round, so kind of keep that in mind as I'm talking about this. He's going towards the end of the first round, and Gibbs and Montgomery is going the beginning of the third, sometimes end of the second round. So the guys that are relatively close in draft situations, but they're splitting right now. So when you look at that situation, I am leaning more towards Montgomery, right? Because right now we don't know who's going to lead this field. If it's anything like last year, they literally almost split it down the middle, right? And then I think Montgomery has the opportunity to get more touchdowns. Gibbs has the opportunity to get more catches, right? So Gibbs might be better on a consistent standpoint, but you're looking for those spike weeks where Montgomery falls in end zone 2 or 3 times. I'm more because of his price, beginning of the third, right? And nobody will be surprised if he was leading or had more fantasy points than Gibbs at the end of the year. So I'm more of on the Montgomery side because of the price. I just think right now Gibbs for him splitting the backfield is a little too rich for my blood at the end of the first round. I need a for sure bell cow if I'm going to take him first round.
Yeah, I mean, it pains me to kind of interject and to in a way to basically agree here, and it's gonna sound weird because I do have David Montgomery stock obviously out there. The reason why it pains me is because I feel like I was one of the ones definitely leading the Gibbs hype train coming into last year. Like I was preaching Gibbs, Gibbs, Gibbs. That's why I took Gibbs in the second round last year in our draft. I'm just a big fan of Gibbs as a talent and what he possesses there. And I do think that, as you mentioned and alluded to from a passing game standpoint, I think that he's a great back for you to have from a PPR standpoint. Now, me saying that I agree with you is sheerly from a price standpoint. If I'm able to get
Yes.
if I'm able to get David Montgomery at the price at a less of a value, and I'm able to, potentially stack and already have my wide receiver one and potentially my RB1, before I'm looking to grab maybe an RB2 or something at that spot, and I can go and get David Montgomery as an RB2, then, definitely I'm looking more so at that value. And so me going with David Montgomery here is sheerly from a value standpoint, even though I'm a big Jameer Gibbs fan. And don't be shocked if you see me take Jameer Gibbs potentially in our draft.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at reports out of camp, which again, it's just the fifth day, so you don't really put much into it. But and when I heard offensive coaches saying that they're planning on using Gibbs a little bit more, are they planning on utilizing him more, and his usage is going to be up? It does raise my eyebrow. But my football knowledge and my just observing of the sport for years, and how David Montgomery looked last year, he looked good, and I don't think coaches can ignore that. And I think they will ride the hot hand. I think we will see a lot of what we saw last year with those two guys. Whoever has the hot hand, that's who's going to get the carries. That's who's going to be utilized. So from a talent standpoint, I do understand why Gibbs goes so high, but David Montgomery is Mr. Reliable. His first season even getting injured and missing time was this past season. He's durable. He's reliable. That offense is explosive with Sam Laporta and Amon-Ra. I do think that I think we'll see a lot more of what we saw last year. And I agree with all three of you guys is that you can easily fall into that trap of taking Jameer Gibbs at the end of the first round, and you may make a mistake there.
Yeah, no, I'll just say this and I'll wrap it with this. when you're looking at Gibbs, and I want to just hammer this point. I know Ramon said it and I said it, but I want to hammer it, right? It's a price thing. It's not because Gibbs is not good. It's a price thing, right? When you're looking at the end of the first round, are you rather have Garrett Wilson or or Gibbs, right? Garrett Wilson. Would you rather have Puka Nacua or Gibbs? Puka Nacua, right? You know what I mean?
I
From a
knew the Rams
price,
part was coming eventually.
well, Puka's going into the first round. AJ Brown or Gibbs, right? When you think about it in that standpoint, I'm like, I would rather in a PPR league take the alpha receiver over the running back that's splitting carries. You know what I mean? So it's again a price standpoint. And then I did a best ball league. Again, this is best ball. I know it's slightly different than your standard home league. And Montgomery went in the 6th round. I gave him on ADP from Fantasy Pros what we use. He's going third, second, third, 4th round. In this league, he went 6th round. When you're looking again at that price from a guy that can be the number one running back, I just can't pass it up.
Yeah, I mean that's what I'm saying. Like in my rule of thumb and my strategy is that the first round I am attacking a solid piece that I can rely upon to give me that production and start a production. Jahmyr Gibbs is a talent and he's a great player. But like to your point, there are better options in that first round that I know are solidified and clear options and clear. Like Gary Wilson is clearly the guy in with the Jets along with Aaron Rodgers. Puka is clearly productive and is a nice complement with Cooper Kupp and can be productive with Cooper Kupp on the field. So to me, like you said, it is a price point thing as to where I wouldn't. It could potentially be a trap if you overvalue Jahmyr Gibbs. You got to take him at the right spot.
Real quick. Sorry, real quick. I just want to ask this question. We talk about first round. Who you guys looking at in the first round, if you don't mind me asking?
I mean,
Man,
I'm looking at Christian McCaffrey.
Yep, that's a lot of people, man.
There's a lot of safe answers going on. I just want
I
to
like
know.
Bijan. I like Bijan too. Like I told you how I feel about Bijan. I think Bijan's gonna have a breakout season.
I like Jamar Chase.
Jamar Chase. Okay.
I like Jamar Chase.
Okay. But
like
you're for sure
Tyreek
like
Hill.
you think it's gonna do well this year. Like I'm okay with taking this guy and feeling great. Jamar Chase and
we've already named them.
Any of them. Yeah, any of them.
Okay. Just interesting.
Those guys.
You got Jefferson. You got Amon-Ra. I mean, that was my ride or die last year.
Okay.
You got some. You got some talent, man. It's gonna be a fun draft. I think that either way, even Marvin Harrison, you have to consider in the first round as well. He's a talent, and he's gonna be the guy out there in Arizona. So I mean, we'll see what happens. But to just get back to what we were talking about with duos, you got Devon Achane, I think, and Raheem Mostert, and then you got which one would you rather, Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris? And I did it on purpose. I think Jaylen Warren at this point in his career is a better back than Najee.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think Najee did better last year. We just kind of was a plotter. I was never a Najee guy, but looking at their value, right? You got Najee the second to beginning of third, then you got Jaylen Warren a round later, 3rd to 4th round, right? I think the decision is pretty much made, right? Who's the most explosive one that you can get at a later round, right? Like I'm going Jaylen Warren with that. And then the other one you asked on Achane and Mostert, right? Mostert one, I'm always kicking myself because last year he was one of my sleeper picks last year. I'll never forget. I was like, and Ramon was back to back to me in a draft, and he ended up leading the league in touchdowns. So, and I was forever trying to play catch up, finding a running back and all these different things. I think that was the start to the end of me last year. But anyway, when I look at that, Achane is second round to end the first, which again I'm out on Achane's price this year. I'm really out on him. Him going second round. That's just too rich for my blood for a guy that's I don't know. I think they got Jalen. They drafted another running back in Jalen Wright. You got still Mostert there. And I think he's very good with his touches. I just don't think that run of like what he did last year of just like taking off and hitting it's possible, but I'm not spending a second round pick on a boom or bust guy. That's never been me. Now, if you're talking about running back 3, sure, but I'm not going to get him there. So I'll probably have no shares of Achane this year in a regular standard league. Now, if we're talking best ball, that's totally different. But Mostert going 6th, 7th round, that's the guy I'm looking for again.
Yeah, definitely out of those two duos, I echo the same sentiments. I have already in a dynasty league a share of Jaylen Warren at this point. I think that he's the guy, obviously, in that Pittsburgh backfield that I would be targeting out of those two. And for the same sentiments as well too, as what was mentioned with A-Chain and Raheem Mostert, I would be rolling with Mostert as well too. You're gonna get him for just so much better of a value than what you're gonna have to potentially spend for A-Chain. And I know that people are going to look at that sample size and going to look at, those weeks where he's putting up 40 points, things of that sort. But I mean, it's a byproduct of that offense. It's a kind of a plug and play type offense. And so, I think that as you even talked about some of the competition that is coming to that backfield, that may yield some things as well too. We know that over there, he's not shy about playing different guys at the running back position. It's the typical running back carousel over there. And so I'm not willing to pay the price for A-Chan right now at this point, even though I do think that the talent is good.
Yeah, I'm staying clean away from this backfield. I mean, I think on top of Raheem Mustard and Devon A-Chain being injured, and there's an injury concern with both of those guys, I just don't know who's going to go off each week. And I don't think that I can take somebody in the second round. I don't know. A second round to me is a starter, a solid starter. I'd rather get somebody else that I know is going to do well and going to give me that consistent production. So to me, I'm out on the backfield completely. Again, talented players. I encourage whoever wants to take them, take them. They are talented players, and like you said, Ramon, their ceiling is very high. But as for me and my strategy and what I like to do, I need a little bit more of real. I need a little bit more of a trust factor in my second round pick. So me, I'm staying clean away from Raheem Mustard and Devon I-Chain now.
You,
But teach his own.
yeah, it's gonna come a week where A-Chain is gonna destroy one of us.
Oh, he
It's
is.
gonna
Oh,
happen. It's
it's
gonna
definitely
happen.
happening.
But
It's
It's
definitely
definitely
gonna
happening.
happen.
But
I play the
I'm not.
consistent game.
I just don't like players like that, and I never really like another one like that. To me is Debo Samuel. Like I know Debo can go off. I know he can, but it's just like, and he'll go off against me. But like I just can't. Like he's always banged up. He's always hurt. And then also with San Francisco offense, you just never know. The only consistent person is gonna eat is Christian McCaffrey. So it's just like that's who Dave. That's what the type of player that Davon I-Chain and Monster remind me of. They are phenomenal with their touches, but it's just like, bro, they'll give you 30 one week and then give you 5 another week. I can't have that.
Right.
So,
So,
um, but moving on, kind of try to speed this up a little bit. I think we knocked out the duos, but I did want to kind of touch on another interesting player here, and that's Saquon in Philly, and what that's gonna do for Philly's offense. We know what Saquon brings. He just come off Hard Knocks. We saw how that went down, which was very weird to see uh, on TV of how the Giants really undervalued Saquon, and it's kind of like the mentality of the front office in the NFL on running backs. But Saquon has found a new home, found that new spark. And again, I look at Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, then I look at Hurts and Saquon, and those two are probably the creme de la creme of dual threat quarterbacks and running back duos. Saquon has sputtered out the gates, but he's in a better situation. I'm expecting a big year from him.
Yeah, I think he's going to have a decent year. Right now, he's going at the end of the first round, and I think that's great for a bell cow running back. I think his biggest competition in that backfield is Jalen Hurts, right? We got Keenan Gainwell there, we got Will Shipley there, a rookie running back. But I think if Saquon is used correctly, which I expect him to use him correctly, I think he will have a decent year. I think he finishes somewhere in the top 10, as far as fantasy points, barring health. But I like the situation. But again, we're gonna see how much they use that the
tush push.
tush push, because again, you would love to see the running back get those. And that's the only knock I would say on him going to that offense is those short yardage where you got another offense, a running back will get that short yardage. I don't know if he gets that. I think Jalen Hurts is really the value in that backfield because he's going to miss out on so many touchdowns.
Yeah, I agree, and I echo those same sentiments. And I know that people are viewing it as an upgrade for Saquon from a potentially a fantasy standpoint to wind up in this offense. I'm going to share why I don't naturally or necessarily feel it's an upgrade. I think that he may finish and be on par to what he was last year. But I think that the first thing is you already alluded to. Jalen Hurts had 15 rushing touchdowns last year. 15 rushing touchdowns. This is not when we were talking about Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. Well, Lamar Jackson only had 5. So that's going to take up a big chunk of those rushing touchdowns that are there. Also, too, last year, Saquon had 60 targets in the passing game. And so that really contributed a lot to even what he did from a fantasy standpoint. Out of that, he had 41 receptions. You think about the fact that what do you have to do? You got to feed A.J. Brown, right? You got to feed Devontae Smith, right? And then if you have Dallas Goedert that's going, you got to feed him, right? So it's not really a ton to me of targets that he's going to get over there. I don't see a big target share there. So I really think that from an overall standpoint, it's going to bolster the offense. That offense should be humming next year. But I don't necessarily feel that it upgrades Saquon in the way that a lot of people feel that it upgrades him from a fantasy standpoint because of what he's going to have to share with Jalen Hurts and also too in a passing game standpoint, falling behind A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and also Dallas Goedert.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And then we have Breece Hall, who he yet to touch on again another season. Ended quite too soon because of injury. As we know, Aaron Rodgers wasn't, injured himself in the first 5 seconds. But I mean, obviously, he's going he's going like he's ranked the RB3 right now, according to Fantasy Pros. But if if Aaron Rodgers is a figment of what he was, and Garrett Wilson will open up the offense, Breece Hall should be in for a big year this season, and I think that Breece will be utilized, and we saw what he did in spurts when he was healthy. I like Breece a lot. If I'm able to get him in the first round, Los, when you ask me if I will take him, I mean, who I would take in the first round, I definitely have Breece in my top 5 of people I would love to have.
No, I agree with you. I think Breece Hall was a guy that surprised me, right? I mean, just his running style, I thought he was more on that Najee Harris plotter type, excuse me. But he showed his breakaway speed, and that surprised me the most, And I think now the
Yeah.
offense is only going to open up now.
Yeah, no, I agree. If I can tell anybody in any format of fantasy football right now, buy shares of Breece Hall. I know I
Yeah.
will be.
I can tell we smiling about Breece. We really looking forward to the type of year he has. I don't have him on so now that we've kind of went through running backs, let's go ahead and do it for the listeners. All of our top 5s will be different. But I want to go through who you guys have as your top 5 running backs, who you guys I think the listeners probably can know who at least 50% of what mine is of how I went through that segment, but top 5 running backs y'all got on y'all board.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna go Bijan first, Christian McCaffrey, because I think he's going to finally take that step back. We've seen people be high on them and then they just crash and burn. Every time there's a guy is number one, it's hard to repeat that. I think he finally takes that step back. That low workload is gonna finally catch up with him. So I'm gonna go Bijan. I'm gonna go Christian McCaffrey. I'm gonna go Breece Hall. I'm gonna go Derrick Henry, and then I'm gonna go Kyron Williams.
Dang.
I
That's
respect it.
interesting. Yeah, that's interesting.
I guess I'll go. I'm still gonna rock Christian McCaffrey #1. Still got him there. I do have Bijan at #2. Breece Hall would be my #3 at this point. Then I little bias here. I'm gonna have Jonathan Taylor at 4, and then take Derrick Henry at 5.
Man, I got the same top 5 as you, Ramon, but at number 5 I got Saquon. I think Saquon is gonna. I think Philly has a plan for him, and I think that's why he chose there. It looks like Philly. It looked like he didn't even give the Giants a chance to match it. So I mean that kind of excited me on Hard Knocks. So I mean I think that they have a true plan for him. But Jonathan Taylor is another sneaky guy that I think is in for a big year as well, with Anthony Richardson coming back off of injury. Again, when you talk about the creme de la creme of running back duos, dual threats, I mean, Anthony Richardson, JT has to be right up there with the best of them. So I like JT. But yeah, Saquon, I think that's the only difference from mine. I agree with your list. And I got Saquon 5. And I mean, King Henry is further down the list for me. King Henry is my top 10, but I don't have him as high as you guys have him.
Respect it. Respect it.
All right. So lastly, before we get out of here, I did want to talk about, since we on running backs, we gave our rankings. Who is your sleeper running back that you expect to have a good year? And I would say a sleeper that's probably falling out of the top 10 of the position overall, probably in the 30s and or later. Who is a sleeper that you guys have on your list that you think that they're just going too low right now?
I would have okay, so this may be a deep sleeper to people. But I think that a guy that is being slept on right now is Chase Brown in Cincinnati. I think that when you look at Joe Mixon vacating that backfield, I know that they did bring over Zach Moss, I believe. But I'm not too big of a Zach Moss guy, a big Zach Moss proponent. I think that Chase Brown is going to be that RB1 within that offense. We've seen what they've been able to do, how Joe Mixon was productive year in and year out over there. And so I think that Chase Brown is a guy that I think they have him slotted at RB 42 right now. If you're getting Chase Brown that late or he's going that late in your draft, like he's definitely a guy that you want to grab. I think that he's somebody that I am comfortable right now as an RB3 on my team. A guy that, as you talk about kind of that flex type of play, I'm not looking at him as an RB2, anything of that sort, but I think he's a guy that's being slept on.
Man, he stole my guy. I was gonna say Chase Brown, but I'll throw an audible in there. I will go to Blake Corum, right? You know, Kyron Williams is already he's one of my top five guys going into this draft. But I like Blake Corum a lot, in the sense that he is a one-for-one replacement for Kyron Williams, who was a guy that was banged up last year, that missed time last year, where we struggled at the running back position once Kyron went down. I think if anything happens to uh, Kyron Williams, who's already had like foot issues back in OTAs. But I think Blake Corum can step right into that role and be a guy that surprises this year.
Oh man, Lois, you took it. You did. Ramon took yours and you took mine. I agree. I like Blake Corum a lot, but just spinning off of that, I think Trey Benson is in a real prime position to become the guy. I mean, if you look at the past couple seasons of James Conner, you know he has had some health issues, and we saw how Trey Benson performed in the combine, which was really impressive. We've seen what he done in Florida State. Now I know Trey Benson has some injuries issues of his own. But I think that when you look at where he's going at 36, I think overall, you know, he's not being thought of a lot. So I mean, I think that if you can get him late in the rounds of I'm sorry, 106 of all. I think if you can get him in the 10th round, I think you got a steal. You got a potential guy that could really be the workhorse for Arizona coming in. So I mean, I like Trey Benson a lot. He would definitely be on my radar. 10th round range is just a steal to me. I think that's just too low. And then you got your guy Ezekiel Elliott in Dallas. I'm joking. But
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
man,
go ahead. You got him.
you, you know at the end you got to cut up. But man, we appreciate everybody for hanging with us this long. We hope that we said something that may help you win your league. Obviously, we're not doing this for us. Not only are we doing this for us because we're passionate about it, but we're doing it for you guys. So if there's something that you did, really, you know, post your draft picks, post who you got, post what steals you had. Even somewhere down the line during the season, if you're seeing that what we said kind of was prophetic to you, man, let us know in the comments. We appreciate our love and support. Make sure that you'll subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to this YouTube, like this video. More fantasy football coverage to come. And until next time, we out of here.
Later.